Well, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, before coming from Spain, where I am from, I live in Madrid. Even I have traveled the world extensively for many, many years. But Mr. Montasami, who has always invited me, this is the 10th time I am coming to Iran since 2011 to international conferences or to presentation of some of the books that I have myself published in Spain, some of which have been translated into Persian. I will show them to you now.
یعنی سومین باریه که میان ایران و یه سری کتابایی نوشتن که بعدش هم به فارسی ترجمه شده.
I have published a total of 12 books since 2008, but I must say that I am not a writer. I don't consider myself a writer.
یعنی که من از سال 2008 تا حالا 12 تا کتاب نوشتم ولی خودم رو نویسنده حساب نمی‌کنم.
Before publishing the first book, I had behind me already 40 years of professional experience.
یعنی قبل از اینکه من کتاب سوم رو چاپ بکنم 40 سال سابقه کاری داشتم.
Of that experience, I was gave me the opportunity, for example, at the age when I was 30 years old. That was in, I will tell the age, not like ladies, in 1981. I had already visited for business, for work, about 50 countries in this world.
یعنی در سن 30 سالگی که در سال 91 که میلادی که 30 سالم بود 50 تا کشور دنیا رو قبلش به خاطر کار شغلی دیدن کرده بودم.
So much of my knowledge comes from real living situations, living the world, living in different countries, and then of course in the last since I published the first book, by research and investigation, you know, into subjects that were very interesting for my publications.
یعنی بیشتر تجربه شخصی به اصطلاح که دنیا رو دیدم و خوب از زمانی که کتابو شروع کردم نوشتن تحقیقاتم انجام دادم.
My professional life was divided in two main stages between 1975 and 1990. I was professionally involved as a director in a company dealing with defense and military supplies, both locally in Spain and internationally.
من زندگیم به دو مرحله تقسیم شد که تا 1975 و بعد از 1990 که قبلا بیشتر به عنوان مدیر شرکت‌هایی کار می‌کردم که در تجهیزات نظامی تو اسپانیایی یا خارج از اسپانیا می‌فروختن.
Something that helped me in that dedication was, in fact, the fact that I was born and raised until I was 16 in a military academy in Spain where they form the air forces. I was born in a military academy and studied there, you know, with military teachers until 16, where that is the place in Spain where they train all the military pilots.
یعنی من تولدم در آکادمی بسیار نظامی بوده تو اسپانیا که جایی که خلبانا رو تربیت می‌کردن.
Another 20 years I spent working for. I started first with an American consulting company specialized in a very specific question, and that lasted until 2010. I was not working all the time for the American company. Part of the time I had my own company with other executives, you know, that had come out from the American company called Alexander Proudfoot.
یعنی من از مدت بودم 20 سال تا سال 2010 بعد از اون تو سری اول که 16 سال تو پایگاه بودم بعد به مدت 20 سال تا سال 2010 تو شرکت‌های حالا بعضی وقتا شرکت‌های آمریکایی بود بعد وقتا شرکت‌های خودم رو داشتم کار می‌کردم.
This consulting company was a specific goal and objective was productivity improvement by means of carrying out human engineering, changing, instructing, doing coaching directly to the supervisors, the first line of command in a company, and it worked very effectively. I know that because I did selling the project, selling the concepts to the top CEOs during 20 years.
میان کار من تو این شرکت‌ها به عنوان مشاوره‌ای بوده که به شرکت‌ها میدادم، مخصوصا به مدیران شرکت‌ها، برای کاری که به عنوان مثلا مهندسی انسانی، نیروی انسانی میگن، برای اینکه بهره وریشون و تولیداتشون بره بالاتر.
However, when I published my second book, Global Crisis number 2, under the title Guilty, the System, I positioned myself, as an anti-system, anti-global system, not somebody like you see in the West, with long hairs, long dirty hairs, things like that, but somebody who doesn't like the system because knows the system too well.
Just can you repeat what you did?
I published my second book in 2010 with the title Global Crisis number 2, because the Global Crisis number 2, Guilty the System.
میگن من کتاب دومم به عنوان بحران‌های جهانی و سیستم‌های گناهکار بود، سیستم گناهکار.
Well, this has had a high cost for me that I had not been able to anticipate, and that was that because I included, for instance, some specific sentences in the Quran, in the Talmud, in the Jewish Talmud, and also a few paragraphs of a book that I find very interesting. I do not know whether you are familiar with that. Is the protocols of the elder wise men of Zion.
یعنی این کتاب دوم برای من هزینه ساز بود، چون که یک سری از جملات تلمود، کتاب مثلا یهودیان و جملات کتابی که از پروتکل‌های مثلا بزرگان یهود بود استفاده کردم تو این کتاب و برای من خیلی دردسر داشت.
I have not realized to sufficient extent that my clients, the people I visited to try to sell our concepts, were the presidents or managing directors of large multinational companies or large Spanish companies with at least 500, 600 employees.
میگن که خیلی شرکتایی که من براشون کار میکردم مثلا شرکتای بزرگی بودن که حداقل 500 600 نفر کارمند داشتن.
And that of course most of them are sixth or seventh line of defense of Zionism.
و اکثرا اینا خط پنجم ششم به اصطلاح خط دفاعی صهیونیست هستن.
Consequently, these gentlemen stopped buying my services, and even receiving me at all.
میگن که پس از اون کتاب شروع کردم به اینکه دیگه اصلا کسایی که مثلا قبلش مشتریای من بودن دیگه اصلا من راه نمیدادن.
That so the only thing that they did to me is they just decided that I would have financially strangled.
و از لحاظ مالی خوب دچار مشکل شدم.
Now, I went on publishing books, but in reality, they had success, in their cornering me. Bringing me to financial exhaustion.
یعنی هر حال میگن که به هر حال تو همون از مالی خواستم من دیگه در مضیقه قرار بدم.
Okay, now, as I told you, I have published about 12 books, mainly in respect of the New World Order, the global crisis, the globalization.
من 12 کتاب نوشتم که عمدتاً در مورد بحران‌های جهانی هست، در مورد جهانی سازی هست و چیزایی در این قبیل.
Masonry, Freemasonry, or Zionism, subject that we shall be discussing today, or, for example, one of them is Wahhabi jihadism, to make people in Spain those who read it, be aware of the difference between Islam and Wahhabi jihadism.
یا همچنین در مورد صهیونیسم و همچنین در مورد وهابیت و کسایی که تو اسپانیا هم هستن از مثلا وهابیایی که اونجا هستن.
Of these books, my friends here in Tehran decided that they wanted to translate some of them, and they did it. In fact, for example, the first one they showed interest in translating was my book called the Zionist lobbies in Spain.
این کتاب رو چند تاش تو ایران ترجمه شده که یکیش حالا همین کتابی که حالا ایشون اینجا به اسپانیایی حالا صهیونیست‌ها در اسپانیا هستن به عنوان فارسیش ترجمه فارسیش هست.
The Persian version of it. The second one that they wanted me to in fact, I was asked to write this book because in January 2014 they invited me to go to the area of Abadan, Khorramshahr, to see the physical area where the war in Iraq was stronger.
من همچنین مناطق خرمشهر آبادان که منطقه جنگی بوده، جنگی ایران عراق، اونجا رو هم دیدم و خب کتاب دومش در این مورد هست.
As a result of that, I published in Spain a short book, The Zionist War Against Khomeini.
کتابی که دومش مثلا جنگ صهیونیست علیه امام خمینی بوده.
Which is the translation.
مشکی نوشته جنگ صهیونیست بشه.
In Persian. The third book was not very long ago. The title in Spanish is The Church, the Catholic Church, Infiltrated by Masonry and Zionism.
یه کتاب بعد این کتابی است که در مورد نفوذ صهیونیست‌ها و فراماسونرها در کلیسا هست.
You have it translated into Farsi with a similar title, not exactly the same.
فارسیشون یهود و هزار توی فراماسونری در مسیحیت رو به عنوان فارسیش هست.
Then the last one is one that I have not presented in Tehran yet, and it's not the purpose of presenting it today because it's a very long and complicated one. I think I'm going to present something about it next Thursday or Friday. I will be in Mashhad with some people who will take me there. Is what is coming in the, for me, near is not tomorrow or 1 week or 1 month, but near future, which is a world financial collapse.
یعنی کتاب بعدی کتاب به اصطلاح سقوط به اصطلاح فرو ریختگی مالی جهانی هست.
And the subtitle is its origin, the Zionist lobbies in Europe and US.
مثلا یه منبع این فروپاشی هم لابی‌های صهیونیست و در اروپا و آمریکا هست.
They have this one. It's going to be changed because really they doesn't have even this title. The final version. It's going to be here. They want to call it Western Financial Collapse.
یعنی کتاب ترجمه شده ولی عنوانش قرار عوض شد. چیزی که اینجا نوشته میشه صهیونیست و بحران مالی اروپا که میگن قراره که به عنوان فروپاشی مالی به اصطلاح غرب عوض شد عنوانش.
And now after this brief introduction, we shall go into the three fields that my friend in Tehran, Mr. Montasami, told me that the university was more interested in listening about, that were Freemasonry, Zionism, and Daesh, or Islamic. And then perhaps I will dedicate a few minutes to update you on the situation that you have been watching in television these few days ago in Catalonia, that part of Spain that wants to be independent.
یعنی که حالا عنوانشون که حالا گفتیم که عنوانی که بهشون گفته بودن در مورد صهیونیسم بود. خب من مقدمه‌ای که صحبت کردم حالا به عنوان اصلیش صحبت می‌کنم ولی میگم خب یه مقداری هم در مورد این جدایی کاتالونیا که به اصطلاح یکی از استان‌های اسپانیا بوده و می‌خواد جدا شه در مورد اونم حالا میگن به شما مسئله جدیدتری بگم.
I believe that in order to prepare a conference properly, I mean, unless you know have everything in your mind, you must have everything in your mind, but not exactly the order or whatever, and you might forget something. So I always like to have a small script of points.
میگن خب شما اطلاع دارید احتمالاً هم مطالب بعضی‌هاش حالا خب الان یه سری چیزای جدیدترش میگم.
For example, now we start with the first point, Freemasonry. Many of you will have heard about Masonry or Freemasonry, the Masons. You know. I do not know what you know about them, but I can tell you that, for example, that in Spain, in my own country, very few people know.
یعنی که شما در مورد فراماسونرها میدونید اطلاعات دارید ولی تو اسپانیا خیلی افراد کمی هستن که در مورد این گروه اطلاعاتی داشته باشن.
In theory, they are an organization worldwide that they are philanthropic to improve the human being, all the good things in the world.
یه از نظری تبلیغاتشونه که اینا سازمان جهانی هستن که میخوان برای زندگی بهتر انسان‌ها به اصطلاح کار کنن.
They accept people of any religion, all religions, because they don't believe in any religion. They believe that they themselves are the religion, the only religion.
برای همین توی گروهشون از هر دین و مذهبی میتونه واردشون بشه، مشکل ندارن، ولی چون که اصلا به هیچ دینی اعتقاد ندارن و خودشون دین میدونن.
The origins of the comes really in the names. Masonry, mason in English, or a maçon in French, means a bricklayer, a constructor.
فراماسونرها خب ماسونری کلمه انگلیسی علاوه کلمه‌ای که به معنی معماری است، حتی وسایل معماری معمولا وسایل ماسونری میگن.
So it's nothing esoterical. It's something as clear as that.
خیلی چیز خیلی پیچیده اسمش نیست.
What happens is that the origins of this is the following. It all started in the United Kingdom. Well, it was England those days. In England, in the times of Lord Cromwell. Lord Cromwell, who wanted to become the Lord Protector of the island and who raised armies to fight against his king and kill him.
این از زمان لورد کرامبل شروع شد تو انگلستان که به اصطلاح می‌خواست ارتش جمع آوری کنه و اون پادشاه اون زمان انگلیس رو بکشه و این کارو کرد.
Lord Cromwell was a Protestant, very Puritan Protestant, who who carried out an enormous genocide among Catholics in England and in Ireland.
لورد کرامبل خودش یه پیروتیان پروتستان بود که خب جنایات خیلی زیاد علیه مسیحیای کاتولیک کرد در انگلستان و در ایرلند.
When you see movies of Hollywood about Lord Cromwell, he's always dealt with, he's such a spiritual man, such a good man, you know? But that is of course because the Jewish own Hollywood, you know, and they want to thank him for killing so many Catholics, you know, and for serving their purposes.
فیلمایی که معمولا در شخص نشون میدن همیشه شخص روحانی خیلی خوبی نشونش میدن چون که به هر حال صهیونیست‌ها برای مقاصد اون خوب کار کرد دیگه.
Lord Cromwell he was a son of a banker. He raised funds by borrowing money from Dutch bankers, Dutch Jewish bankers. And so after he won the war, he had to return the principal plus the interests.
ایشون فرزند یک بانکدار بود که خب مقادیر زیادی پول از بانکدارای یا متمولای آلمانی جمع آوری کرد و خب وقتی که جنگ برد پولا رو با اصلش و بهرهش برگردون به کسایی که بهش قرض داده بودن.
In order, besides doing that, he also modified some of the rules existing in England those days, because the Jews had been expelled for the first time from England in 1290.
بعد از اینکه جنگ برد یه سری قوانین رو عوض کرد. یهودی‌ها قبلا در سال 1290 میلادی از انگلستان اخراج شده بودند.
So that he started offering the bankers, the families and relatives and people they could move to London, to England again.
و ایشون شروع کرد به دورش تشویق کردن این افراد که برگردن به لندن و انگلستان.
When they came there and they settled, they found that there was an organization that had built and was building still most of the high palaces, castles, you know, public buildings in Europe. But they had been built by Masons who were operative Masons. Cutters of stone, you know, specialists.
اینا مثلا از وقت شروع کردن به ساختن قصرها و خیلی ساختمانایی که تو انگلستان و مناطق بود و به همین هم مثلا از لحاظ کاری مثلا دست اینا شده برای همین اسم معمارا روشون افتاده.
And they saw also that this organization was working throughout Europe. That they were a very closed group, you know, and also very important for the Jewish bankers. They didn't pay taxes, you know. The Jewish have never liked paying taxes a lot.
و اینا گروهی بودن که خب گروه به اصطلاح بسته و خیلی نزدیکی به هم دیگه بودن و در حال همدیگه رو پشتیبانی می‌کردن و در اروپا فعال بودن و خب مالیات هم نمی‌دادن.
So little by little, this was in around the year around 1660-70, so that they took over little by little some of the top positions, not working themselves, but in the structure. They created a superstructure, and they originated what was later on symbolic masonry, symbolic or artificial masonry. That is the one that has survived until nowadays.
تا سال 1660 تا دهه 1670 میلادی اینا تقریبا بیشتر به اصطلاح قدرت و جای مهم رو در دست گرفته بودن و دیگه کارهای خودشون کار خاصی نمی‌کردن، کار معماری بکنن، دیگه با عنوان سمبولیک شد و اینا یه ساختار خیلی عظیمی درست کردن که به اصطلاح خودشون کنترل همه چی داشته باشن.
Well, this all came up to fruition, and when in 1717, they created the Lodge of London, and also in 1723, when Anderson wrote the Masonic constitutions. 1717 was the foundation of the Lodge, the Great Lodge of London.
یه در سال 1717 اینا لوژ لندن درست کردن.
1723 is when Mr. Anderson, who was formerly a Protestant pastor, joined Masonry, wrote their constitutions.
و در سال 1723 میلادی اون اساسنامه خودشون نوشتند، اساسنامه فراماسونرها.
After that, little by little, they went first into places like the Caribbean, Jamaica, for instance. The island of Jamaica had the first lodges in America, or lodges also in France later on. So they were moving, all the time. They call, as I said before, they call themselves the religion.
What they call them?
They call themselves the religion.
Okay. و بعد کم کم پخش شدن، نفوذشون رو گسترش دادن به دریای کارایی و جامائیکا و همطور به فرانسه و میگن ما خودمون یه دینیم دیگه به اصطلاح.
The symbology and rites and all those things are taken very directly from the Egyptian mythology.
و علائم و به اصطلاح سمبولاشون عمدتاً از خط هیروگلیف مصری گرفتن.
For them, some ancestor of them is a certain gentleman called a worker, founder of. He did foundry in bronze, and he cooperated in the construction of the Solomon's temple in Israel. Hiram, his name was Hiram. He was a bronze. He did foundry in bronze, and he cooperated in the construction of the Temple of Solomon.
They claim that.
They claim that it's a legend, but they base everything, most of it, in that legend.
میگن که اینا مثلا ادعاشون اینه که مثلا اجدادشون همون سازندگان هیکل سلیمان بودند.
The thing is that at that point in time, as everybody knows who has read the Bible, Solomon was very busy with the Queen of Sheba. Solomon was very busy involved with the Queen of Sheba, who had come from Ethiopia.
میگن که سلیمان با ملکه سبا به اصطلاح خیلی کار
with the Queen of Sheba, involved sentimentally.
تو مترجم خیلی معنی دقیق کلمه.
That is in the Bible. What I am saying is in the Bible. I'm not inventing.
یعنی الان طبق اون چیزی که در انجیل هست اینه که سلیمان و ملکه بابل تعامل زیاد داشتن با هم.
It was respects that Solomon was involved with her and that they were building the Temple of Solomon, not about the rest of the things they say, no? Only that. And apparently their legend goes that Hiram, you know, made the Queen of Sheba fall in love with him, you know, and so they had some relationships. Then two of his people learning from him killed Hiram, and finally the Queen of Sheba left Israel and went to her place, but she was already pregnant with Hiram's son. That's why the Masons call themselves also the children or the sons of the widow.
میگه که تو من کمالی متوجه ظاهرا یه داستان هست توی انجیل، حالا اینطور که صحبت میکنن، حتی من چون پشت زمینش نمیدونم خیلی، ولی میگن که ظاهرا یه شخصی بوده میگن که با اون ملکه، چون میگن که شبا که حالا از اتیوپی اومده بوده، حالا اون چیزی که میدونیم معمولا ملکه شباست که از یمن حالا هست. حالا من کمی تو اینجا متوجه منظورشون نشدم. میگن که خب به اصطلاح اون ملکه شبا از یک شخصی به نام هرم حالا حامله شده بوده و اون میگن ما بچه‌های چی هستیم، مثلا مطلقه مثلا یا بیوه میگن چون بعد برگشت بشی به عنوان بیوه حساب میکنن و ما فراماسونرها خودشون بچه‌های بیوه حساب میگن.
I know that all these things sound like fairy stories, but this is in reality what Masons based, you know, their genealogy, you know, and what they respect and where they come from and why they are so special.
میگم ممکنه کمی اینا برای شما چیز خیلی مشخصی نباشه، کمی عجیب و غریب باشه، ولی فراماسونرها حالا با اون داستانی که حالا میگن که به اصطلاح افسانه‌ای که برای خودشون معتقدن، خودشون هم به اصطلاح یه دارای ریشه و اساس مثلا میدونن، ما ریشه داریم در تاریخ.
We must remember always and bear in mind that as from those years, dates we mentioned before, 1717, 1723, all the lodges found in the world, you know, had a high master, that degree 33, who besides being a Mason, normally was also a Jewish. A Mason and also a Jewish at the same time. The top chiefs of the lodges.
میگن که مثلا اون رئیس مثلا اون لوژ اصلیشون هم فراماسونر هم واسه یهودی.
So that the top Judaism had already a good reason, you know, to be seen, even if it was a very discreet societies, to form part, you know, of something that could start controlling things and taking actions.
میگن برای همین معمولا دنبال تجزیه مناطق مثلا کشور یا مناطق هستن تا بتونن کنترل بهتری داشته باشن روی مناطق.
For example, I will tell you something that perhaps will surprise some of you, but in 1776 the American Revolution took place. Out of the, I don't think it was 23 or 32 founding fathers of the United States Constitution, about 40% of them were Masons.
و انقلاب آمریکا، حالا انقلاب که میگم به خاطر چون قبلش آمریکا مستعمره انگلیس بوده و شورش کردن و انقلاب کردن که از انگلیس مستقل شدن، اون کسایی که به عنوان مثلا تو آمریکا به عنوان فاندینگ فادر یا مؤسسین مثلا پدران مؤسس نامیده میشن، اینا و قانون اساسی آمریکا رو نوشتن دفعه اول، اینا 40%شون فراماسونر بودن.
Starting with George Washington, Jefferson, and all the most important ones.
و حالا اسامی که گفتن جورج واشنگتن یا جفرسون هم یا همینا یهودی بودن یا فراماسونر بودن.
In 1792, they took part and they were really vital in the instrumentation of the French Revolution, and these were the English Masons, mainly the British Masons, and part of the French Masons as well, supporting, but more the influence of the British Masons.
و همینطور در انقلاب فرانسه اون کسایی که پشت صحنه بودن و محرکای اساسی بودن فراماسونرهای انگلیس بودن و بخشی از اونها که فراماسونرهای فرانسه بودن.
They were also very instrumental behind the curtains in the 1917 Russian Revolution. That more than Russian Revolution, we could very specifically and clearly call a Jewish revolution in Russia.
و همینطور در انقلاب 1917 روسیه که اونا بازم دوباره نقش اساسی داشتن با اینکه پشت پرده بود، ولی و اونجا به همین ترتیب بود. حتی به عنوان اینکه گفته میشه که انقلاب مثلا یهودی انقلاب یهودی بود انقلاب روسیه.
With a population of about 2% of Jewish in the high ranks, of the new proletariat system, the commanders, about 90% of them were Jewish.
با اینکه در روسیه 2% یهودی‌ها کلا جمعیتشون 2% بیشتر نیست نبود، ولی در اون حکومت پرولتاریا یا حکومت کارگری که به اصطلاح در بعد از انقلاب روسیه تشکیل شد 90% پست‌های بالا همش دست یهودی‌ها بود.
In this book I mentioned before the protocols of the eldest wise men of Zion, that is a very short one, and that I recommend people who are interested in getting it, if they can get it through internet or something like that, because it's not very widely sold, This is a book that I have read many times, that there was a very strong arguments on whether it was a true book or a fake book. A true or a fake book.
میان در مورد این پروتکل حکمای یهود که حالا اینجا ایشون چاپشو دارن و میان تو اینترنت هم میشه قابل دسترسی هست، ولی خب صحبت اینه که کم شک و شبهه هست که این یک کتاب واقعی یا کتاب به اصطلاح ساختگی.
The truth is that, my truth, everybody has his own meaning, is that after reading it, is that the origins they give to the 24 chapters, it has short chapters, do not belong, as they say, to any Masonic or Zionist top sessions, that then the paper went on to somebody who wrote the book about it. My thought is something else. Because they say that these are based on 24, let's say, declarations, minutes of meetings had by top Zionism in Basel, in Switzerland. That's what they say, but I disagree.
میگن که اینا کتاب که اینجا هست هم پروتکل حکمای یهود میگن که اینا 24 فصل 24 مثلا صورت جلسه 24 جلسه سران صهیونیست بوده که من خودم موافق نیستم، عقیدم این نیست.
I rather think that it was somebody, one person or a small group of persons who knew a lot about Masonry and Zionism, and who were able to prophesize more or less what would be happening in the next 100 and something years, as from 1897, the date when first it was published in Russia.
میگن که من عقیده خودم اینه که این مطالب کسی نوشته که خب اطلاعات زیادی داشته از این قضیه فراماسونرها و صهیونیست‌ها و پیش بینی کرده بیشتر اون که حالا در آینده چی خواهد شد و اینا تو روسیه اولین بار چاپ شده اونجا، نه اینکه الان صورت جلسه واقعی اون جلسات صهیونیسته باشه.
I can tell you that I have read it and that more than 90% of what it says here more than 120 years ago has been fulfilled.
میگن که حدوداً بخش زیادی حدوداً 90% چیزایی که الهی شخصی این که 120 سال پیش حدوداً نوشته الان به وقوع پیوسته.
In their plans of the top Zionism of controlling the world, they said already at that point in time that they controlled all the press, that they controlled all the money 120 years ago, for instance.
برنامه این بوده که مثلا بعداً این کار خواهند کرد، میگه الان تقریباً تمام امور مالی و امور سیاسی دنیا رو تقریباً در دست دارن.
So that they also said in the book that Masonry was created by them and had the role to play of being the visible face of Zionism.
و تو اینجا نوشته شده که مثلا فراماسونری به اصطلاح به وسیله صهیونیست‌ها درست شده و عمدن درست شده که اون چهره به اصطلاح بیرونی صهیونیست باشه.
Now to say something about something that has relationship with the situation the world is living these days, I will say that there was a famous Mason called Mr. Albert Pike, who lived in the city of Charleston in the US, and who was a Mason 33 degree.
33 degree?
33 degree. Degree 33 is the highest degree in Masonry.
یعنی که شخصی بوده که به عنوان اسمش آلبرت پایک که در شهر چارلستون آمریکا بوده و درجه مثلا مرتبه سیاسی که یکی از مراتب بالای فراماسونری هست داشته.
This Albert Pike had been a Confederate general, you know, who had proven he was a coward in the battlefields. He was sentenced to jail, but the president of the U.S. those days, who was another Mason like him, you know, just condoned his sentence.
یعنی جنرال مثلا این آلبرت پایک یکی از افسرهای یا مثلا فرمانده‌های ارتش کنفدراسیون بوده. کنفدراسیون اون وقتی بوده که آمریکا به این دو مثلا جنگ داخلی داشتن و جنوب و جنوبی‌ها که حالا اصطلاحاً گفته میشن طرفدار بردهداری بودن با شمالی‌ها می‌جنگیدن. میگه ایشون و خوب شکست خوردن آخر بار. میگه که این با اینکه دستگیر شد و بعداً به زندان محکوم شد ولی خب توسط رئیس جمهور که اونم خودش یه فراماسونر بود بخشیده شد و آزاد شد.
This gentleman who died quite old, you know, has monuments in Washington these days, was able to, he sent three specific letters to Mr. Mazzini. Mazzini was the chief of the Illuminati system in Europe. Mr. Mazzini, Illuminati system in Europe.
What that system is? Because I got to explain for them.
Well, the Illuminati started in 1776 with the Illuminati of Baviera. It was top Zionism, top Jewish again, you know, apart from the Masonry, but they were dedicated to the same goals altogether, the Illuminati.
What was the name of the person?
The chief of the Illuminati in Europe those days, his name was Mazzini. Mazzini.
Italian, maybe.
Italian, yes. He was fighting together with Garibaldi when he started making the Italian Republic and everything else, no? And the correspondence is true. It can be found in internet very easily.
So you mean this Albert Pike sent the three letters?
Three letters.
این آلبرت پایک که حالا مثلا آزاد شد و رئیس حالا خودش هم یه فرمانده‌ای از ارتش کنفدراسیون بود تو آمریکا. یعنی سه تا نامه به یه شخصی به نام ماسینی که حالا ایتالیایی بود و اونم یکی از آدمای مثلا رده بالای سازمان دیگه ایلومیناتی در اروپا که ایلومیناتی هم یه چیز شبیه همین فراماسونری بوده. اونم یه بخش دیگه اونم دوره صهیونیست ساخته بودن.
In the contents of these three letters that according to Mr. Albert Pike had been given to them, transmitted to them by his spiritual guides, he wrote the way in which the next 3 world wars were going to be fought and with which results.
Who was the spiritual?
Albert Pike had spiritual guides who, I mean, like many people say they have.
Claiming that I have a spiritual, something from
entities of another dimensions.
Okay.
Entities of another dimensions. In fact, he said
not a real man. Coming from heaven to him.
Somebody from another dimension, perhaps that he couldn't see, but that he could hear. No?
Okay.
He said one of the things he claimed in his books is that he could contact with Satan at his will.
شخص آلبرت پایک این سه تا نامه‌ای که نوشته محتوایی که مدعی بوده که اینا را توسط یک مثلا ماورایی بهش میرسه. این منظور اینطوریه، مثلا یه رهبر روحانی، منظور این که شخصی نبوده، یعنی شخصی بوده که ادعا می‌کرد که مثلا حالا بهش میرسه، حالا از کجا میرسه. و تو اینا برنامه 3 تا جنگ جهان آینده را ایشون نوشته که به چه صورتی رخ میده.
These spiritual guides, which were not very positive, of course, what they said is that this is what was going to be happening, these 3 wars, and what had the Masons and the Illuminati, I mean, the people who ruled the top levels of the world, what they had to do with the governments of the several countries, so that these wars would happen, would not happen, but would happen.
میگن که
these negative spiritual guides, you know, or entities, you know, said that how the wars were going to be and what they had to do themselves as Masons or Illuminati, so that the wars would happen.
حالا برنامه این سه نامه که نوشتن که برنامه سه جنگ جهانی نوشته این نیست که حالا پیش بینی کنه که چه خواهد شد، بلکه دستورالعملیه که داده که چه کار بکنن رهبرای دنیا. مثلا حالا این که یکی که مسئول فراماسونری بوده به یکی از مسئولای ایلومیناتی که اونم دوره شاخه دیگه از سازمان‌های صهیونیستی بوده، چطوری مثلا با رهبرای جهان تعامل داشته باشن که این کار پیش یعنی حتما رخ بده، نه اینکه حالا یعنی برنامه جنگ بوده که برنامه واسه اینکه چی بشه دستورالعملی که این سه تا جنگ پیش بیاد، نه اینکه حالا با پیش بینی باشه که فقط این هم چیزی خواهد شد، بلکه بشه هر چیزی.
Very basically and very shortly, they said that the First World War would be fought in Europe, and it would have the main purpose of bringing down those Catholic or Orthodox countries like Germany or Russia, which it happened, that Russia would lose their faith and that it would become a communist and atheist country.
و برنامه جنگ جهانی اول که پیش بینی کرده بودن این بوده که جنگ در اروپا رخ بده و نیروهای به اصطلاح اون کاتولیکایی که کشورهای مرکز کاتولیک هستند تو اروپا بیاره پایین، که یکیش آلمان بود و یکی دیگه‌ش هم که روسیه که به عنوان کشور الحادی تبدیل شد.
The second war would be with the purpose of destroying what they called already in 1872 in these letters fascism.
و جنگ جهانی دوم به عنوان چیزی که گفتم فاشیسم رو می‌خواستن بیارن پایین.
And also to fix the power of Russia and communism and atheism in the world as much as possible.
برای تثبیت قدرت روسیه به عنوان قدرت الحادی.
The Third World War, this spirits guide said, would be a result of a world confrontation between Muslims and Christians.
و جنگ سوم جهانی رو پیش بینی کردن که باید یک در نتیجه برخورد مسلمان‌ها و مسیحی‌ها پیش بیاد.
But not only that, but because the purpose of the second World War, I forgot, was to consolidate the state, create the state of Israel. But they say that in this third war, even the state of Israel will suffer a lot, the Jews. So the purpose is, in the course of that war, to destroy all existing religions.
This for the third war.
For the Third World War. After the Third War and after the effects, destroying all the three religions.
و هدف این بوده که برنامه این است که بعد از جنگ سومی که حالا پیش بینی کرده بودن این که کلا دیگه کلیه دینا نابود شده باشه.
And so that the people after such a destruction, in a theoretical World War III, would be so lost, that they would believe anything they would tell them, a new sort of syncretic spirituality, without any religion at all, and that is when they think that they could start with a diminished population to control the rest of the world better.
و برنامه این بوده که همونطور که گفتن بعد از جنگ سوم کلا دینا نابود شده باشن و افراد یا دین نداشته باشن یا به سری عقاید ساختگی به اصطلاح مصنوعی معتقد باشن و یکی از اهداف اینا هم اینه که برای اینکه کنترل کنن جمعیت جهان رو بیارن پایین.
Well, who would have thought of something like this, becoming a possibility before the 9/11 in New York, and what has been happening in those 16 years after that? Who would believe that these things
کی فکر می‌کرد که مثلا اون قضیه سپتامبر 11 در آمریکا پیش بیاد و 16 سالی بعد از اون که حالا مسائلی که پشت سر اون حالا هم تو ادامه بده که فکر می‌کنی همچین چیزی بتونن درست کنن.
The entity called Daesh, Islamic State, as we know, in more than 1 or 2 or 3 countries has already called, went into killing so many Christians, but also Islamic Sunnis, that it's incredible. And troops of coalitions have come to this part of the world, and they have not progressed more because certain allies of Syria are acting the right way.
خب یه چیزی مثل داعش درست کردن که خب این هم کشور رو درگیر کنه و از اون طرف اینقدر به تعداد زیادی نیرو به همین بهونه بتونن از کشورهای خودشون بیارن تو منطقه مستقر کنن، ولی خب نتونستن به خاطر اون مقاومتی که در مقابلشون تو سوریه شده یه مقداری زمینگیر شدن.
I don't think myself, having been in the military world supplies and knowing the military and knowing something about geostrategy, I don't think there's going to be a World War III, because World War III would finally mean also a confrontation between the US and Russia, and including a nuclear total confrontation. When somebody asked about 4 or 5 weeks ago to Vladimir Putin what would happen in nuclear confrontation, total confrontation between the US and Russia, he said, better don't ask me, because nobody will survive.
و به نظر ایشون یا به نظر من جنگ جهانی سوم پیش نخواهد اومد، چون که بخواد ادامه پیدا کنه تهش میرسه به درگیری بین صهیونیست‌ها و روسیه که خب یه درگیری اتمیه و خب چند سال پیش از پوتین پرسیده بودن که همچین چیزی پیش بیاد چی میشه، گفت بهتر که نپرسه چون که کسی دیگه باقی نمیمونه.
And that is not because the Russian army is more powerful or spends more than the American army, but Russia has more nuclear heads, and regarding tactical missiles has a superiority of 4 or 5 to 1 to the States, and in ICBMs it's 1 to 1 roughly, so that from that point of view, even if the US would attack first, just the retaliation would destroy, Russia would be destroyed, but America would also be destroyed totally.
و ارتش روسیه قوی ترین ارتشی، ولی اگه از لحاظ موشک‌هایی که داره و بمب‌های اتمی که داره بیشترن و خب قدرتشون بیشتره، و اگه حتی آمریکا حمله اولیه انجام بده بازم قدرت تلافی روسیه طوریه که خیلی قوی‌تر خواهد.
So as I coincide with that vision of Putin, what would happen in that confrontation, I hope and I think and I hope that it will not happen. But we are going to see many more regional confrontations.
یا به عقیده من امیدوارم که هم چیز پیش نیاد ولی پیش نخواهد اومد، ولی هم تعداد زیادی درگیری‌های منطقه‌ای حتما خواهیم داشت.
Because prophecies are always possible futures that entities of another dimensions can foresee, anticipate, or even ask assistance for that to happen. But the prophecies are not always fulfilled.
و پیش‌بینی‌هایی که هست میشه با اینکه ممکن گاهی حالا از طریق حالا بیشتر فکر کنم منظورشون اینه که از نیروهای شیطانی ممکن به کسایی رسیده باشه، ولی همیشه پیش به عمل نخواهد شده. اینطوری نیست که همیشه به ببرده.
Freemasonry and especially Zionism, top Jewish banks, promoted and financed both world wars. Financing, because money was going through central banks, financing both sides, so that regardless of who would lose or win, that was independent. They were always going to cash their money plus their interest plus their construction.
و فراماسونرها و صهیونیست‌ها همیشه مثلا مؤسسات مالیشون همیشه توی این جنگایی که پیش اومده هر دو طرف این طرف مثلا حمایت کردن، طوری که هر کی پیروز بشن میگن که ما حامی شما بودیم و اصل پولشون رو به علاوه سود به علاوه هزینه بازسازی رو بتونن پس بگیرن.
And they are behind the intention, of taking us to World War III with as many false flag attacks, as they can maneuver, manipulate, I think that we are in that stage now. That they will try to manipulate with false flag attacks, or whatever, so that to see if one spark ignites, for the possibility of World War III.
و برای شروع درگیری اینا هم ما الان در این مرحله که هستیم خیلی وقتا اینا با یک به اون پرچم کاذب منظور اینه که مثلا فرض کن یک کشوری مثلا میگن این گروه به اون گروه حمله کرده، که اون گروه حمله نکرده، یک به گروه دو، خود این صهیونیست‌ها میرن پرچم یک گروه برمی‌دارن به یکی دیگه حمله میکنن برای اینکه مثلا جرقه درگیری بین دو گروه چیکار کنن، ایجاد کنن.
Zionists created the United Nations that facilitated later, very quickly, the creation and the legitimization of the State of Israel, for instance. But the United Nations is just following a script towards the so-called New World Order.
صهیونیست‌ها سازمان ایجاد کردن که خود سازمان بعداً موجد یا ایجاد کننده اسرائیل بود و تقریباً طبق همون دستورالعمل اون پیش میره.
The reason why most politicians, especially in the Western world, also in the rest of the world, in many countries, but especially in the West, are so weak or don't take the right decisions, is because in this book, the Protocols of the Science of Zion, they say that in the future, they will make people elect new kings. They call them kings or presidents, who have a dark Panamax in their past. And the reference to Panamax refers to a scandal that was in Panama with a politician, so that all people who reach levels of presidents in the world, in the West, must have a hidden secret that makes them to be in the hands of these people.
و برنامه‌شون این بوده که همونطور که تو این قبلا پیش بینی شده بود اینه که رهبران مخصوصا رهبران غرب و طوری کسایی بیان رو کار که همیشه یک افتضاحات یا مسائل ننگینی داشته باشن تو تاریخ زندگیشون که هر وقت که بخوان گوش نکنن اون برملا بشه. مثلا رازای مثلا کثیفی داشته باشن که برای همین بتونن اینا رو کنترل کنن و بیان که اگر مثلا اطاعت نکنید ما اینا برملا بکنن آورده بده.
The protocols say that Masonry created by them is also going to be at a point in time dissolved by them, totally dissolved by them, and that will be the time when their Messiah comes, the Jewish Messiah comes. The Jewish Messiah, universal King, comes to the world.
و تو همین کتابی که به عنوان پروتکل صهیونیست هست گفته شده که دست آخر اون فراماسونری هم اینا خودشون ملغا میکنن و اون زمانی که حالا قراره که اون منجی یهود اون کسی که اون مسیحی نه مسیحی که ما میگیم منجی یهود بیاد و حکومت کل جهان در دست بگیره.
I suppose that most Freemasons, especially those in very top positions, do not agree with this, and that's why there are some discrepancies, at these top levels at this point in time.
در حالی که بعضی از این رؤسای بلند مرتبه فراماسونری لوژه فراماسونری با این مسئله موافق نیستن و بخاطر همین بعضی وقتا بینشون مقداری کشمکش هم پیش میاد.
And with this we finish with the Masonry chapter, but believe me, most of the leaders, political leaders and company leaders, media leaders, banking leaders in the Western world are most of them Masons, and of course all of them practically Zionists.
ما این بخش صحبت در مورد فراماسونرها اینجا با این پایان میبریم که به این صورت که تقریبا کلیه رؤسا مسئول سیاسی، مالی و شرکت‌های بزرگ تو غرب فراماسونر هستند و همینطور صهیونیست.
Zionism, you must always make a difference, even if it has the same objectives. There are two different organizations. One of them, the political side of it, is of course instrumented by the Zionist entity of Israel.
Yes, you mean that there are
Zionism. Zionism.
There are several types of Zionists.
Two types. The political one that is incarnated by the State of Israel, the Zionist entity of Israel, and the world banking and financial system that is controlled by top Jewish people, top Jewish bankers.
صهیونیسم ما دو گروه یا دو دسته تقسیم میشن. یه دسته سیاسی که مثلا اون سردستش همون نمان سمبولش دولت اسرائیل هست و یه دسته مالی که بانک‌ها و مؤسسات مالی هستن که دسته صهیونیست هستن.
Both have the same origin, let's say, in the dark, what they call the dark cabal, dark way. or top Judaism. For example, I have seen myself a video in internet of Netanyahu about 15 or 17 years ago, younger, he had curled, longer hair, he's surrounded by 5 or 6 rabbis, and they're speaking in Yiddish, Hebrew, but they're subtitling and the rabbis are telling him in a low voice, but the microphone has taken it, because you must do whatever you can to accelerate the coming of the Messiah. And Netanyahu says, well, I'm doing my best. When he says I'm doing my best, he refers to I'm trying to best as many Palestinians as possible.
صهیونیست ها معمولا مسائل مخفی دارن که یکی از چیزایی که میگن که یکی از مسائل در 15 سال پیش یک صحنه بوده که نتانیاهو با دوره شده بوده با چند تا از این هاخامای یهود و تو گوششون میگفتن که میکروفون صداشون با که صحبت آهسته میکردن صداشون گرفته بوده، میگفتن که شما باید هر کاری میتونید بکنید که زودتر گنجه یهود یا مسائل یهود بیاد و ایشون هم گفته، نتانیاهو هم گفته بله من تمام تلاش خودم میکنم که منظورش اینه که هرچی بیشتر میتونم فلسطینی‌ها رو بکشم یا جلوی
Zionism, was originally constituted by Jews, and it still is, but it has incorporated many Christians and many Muslims as well to their ideology.
صهیونیسم این که ایجاد کنندش یهودی‌ها بودن، ولی الان خیلی از مسیحی‌ها و حتی بعضی از مسلمان‌ها هم تو خودش وارد کرده که اونا هم صهیونیستن.
In one of the meetings I went to Tehran, there was a couple of years ago or 3, there was an English what is the Episcopalian, what is the main religion in England? Not Episcopalian, Anglican. They are from the Anglican Church, and he has written a couple of books that are translated into Spanish and so on, and that they say it's the Christian soldiers of Zion. The books published in the UK, for which he was reprimanded by his bishop, but the Christian soldiers of Zion, meaning those people who go to fight to the Middle East in favor of Israel.
به عنوان همون که مثل مسیحی اومدن یه کتابی بوده که 2 سال پیش ایشون توی تهران دیدن و کتاب عنوانش این بوده که مثلا سربازان مسیحی اسرائیل
of Zion.
سربازان مسیحی صهیون.
So in other words, that the European armies are working, whether they know it or not, want it or not, for Zionism.
ارتشای اروپایی چه بدونن چه ندونن کلا در خدمت صهیونیست هستن.
Suppose we will have 2 hours in total, and I have another 15 or 20 minutes, and then comes the questions. That is right.
15 minutes.
I hope so. Well, I think I have gone too slowly, and we go more quickly in order to finalize another 15 minutes. And we finish in 15 minutes. It will be like 1 hour or so in total, and we shall have as long as possible necessary for questions. No? Any problem. In general, those supporters of Zionism, supporting Zionist activity, disregard at all, consider all Palestinian people. Those who support the Zionist activity have no respect and don't want even to know about the Palestinians.
کسایی که مثلا حامیان صهیونیسم هیچ کلا اعتقاد به هیچ حق واسه فلسطینی‌ها نیستن.
In my book, Zionist Lobbies in Spain, I pick up in one of the chapters a book that has been written about 5 or 6 years ago by a Jewish anti-Zionist who is a professor of history in the University of Tel Aviv, who says things like, the title of the book is The Invention of the Jewish People, the invention of the Jewish nation, or of the Jewish race, the invention, because he denies all that totally, and disassembles it totally in the book. His name is Shlomo Sanz.
میگن یکی از توی همین کتاب اشاره شده به یکی از کتابی که توسط یکی از استادای یهودی که تو اسرائیل هست ولی خب خودش ضد صهیونیسته که یکی اصلا عنوان کتابش اینه که اختراع ملت یهودی هم چیز اصلا وجود نداشته و اون طرف هم همچین صحبتایی هست.
Well, he says there's nothing genetic or special with the Jewish with respect to any other human person, chromosomically, in the chromosomes, genetically, or anything else. And of course, the history, as it's written now by Zionism, is very, very different to the history he knows, from his Jewish point of view.
تو اون کتاب ذکر شده که یهودی معتقدن که ملت برگزیده‌اند، یعنی ملت برترند. تو کتاب ذکر شده که یهودی‌ها هیچ اندازه ژنتیکی و کروموزومی هیچ فرقی نداره با بقیه ملت‌های دنیا و یعنی اینکه به عنوان ملت برتر یا چیزای خاصی دارن هم چیزی نیست.
The thing is that there is an association that exists in the world, is associations of Friends of Israel, that is presided by one of our ex-presidents in Spain, Mr. Aznar, is the president of that association in the world. Association Friends of Israel.
So what?
And the president is Mr. Aznar, or an ex-president of Spain.
What's the issue of this?
Well, that it defends, of course, the interests of Sephardites being the Jews that originated from Spain and who were expelled in 1492.
من تو اسپانیایی که یه انجمن هست به عنوان انجمن دوستان اسرائیل که رئیسش یکی از رئیس جمهورهای قبلی
Well, the he was an ex-president of the government of Spain. And he's now president of this association, Friends of Israel. Huh? No, but there's the chief of the state, there's a king, head of the government, that's right. President of the government.
رئیسش آقای ازناری که از نخست وزیر قبلی اسپانیاست و حامی تبلیغ میکنن به عنوان حمایت از اسرائیل و یهودی‌های سفاردان که به عنوان کسایی هستن که از اسپانیا اخراج شدن.
Israel these days is not inhabited by those people who come from the house of David or the house of any of the children, of Israel, because Judaism is just and only, as Shlomo Sanz says, a religion and nothing else. A religion.
من توضیح بدم در مورد صحبتشون چون میفهمم که اسرائیل کسایی که امروز مثلا یهودیایی که تو اسرائیل هستن اینا هیچ ارتباط به اصطلاح نسلی با پیامبران یهود مثل حضرت داوود یا سلیمان و بقیه نداشتن. چون عقیده اسرائیل اینه که یهودیان ما مثلا ژنتیکی هم یهودی‌ها میگن ما این صحبت ادعایی که دارن که ما یه نسل به اصطلاح چیده هستیم، یه ملت حتی یه نژاد هستیم، اعتقاداً ما یه نژادیم، در حالی که ایشون میگن که هم چیزی وجود نداره و اینا فقط یه مذهبند مثل بقیه که مذاهبی که هست.
If you want to know the statistics, 80% of the so-called Jewish, who call themselves Jewish in the world, of about 33 million that are in the world today, 80% of them correspond to the ethnical group Ashkenazi, called Ashkenazis, the Ashkenazis were never ever in Palestine or in Israel. They come from the old kingdom of Khazaria, which is part of Kazakhstan, the Caucasus, Georgia, and Ukraine. It was a large empire, and they converted into Judaism, the king and the nobles and then everybody, in the year 700 and something, between 700 and 800. They converted to the religion, but ethnically they have nothing to do with that, with the people in Israel. These people then migrated, many of them, to Russia, were from the Russian Jewish camp, from Khazaria, or to Europe, to Germany, Poland, and many Jews, and those were Khazarians, people, so that if the people living in Israel would know that their ancestors, 80% of them, had never been in Palestine, or had never been in Israel, would be greatly surprised. But 80% is like that, Ashkenazi Jews. For example, I always give the example, an ugly Ashkenazi man is Henry Kissinger. He's an Ashkenazi Jew. A handsome Ashkenazi man is Paul Newman, for instance, who made the movie Exodus.
همونطوری گفتیم یهودی معتقدن که اینا از نسل مثلا اسرائیل همون حضرت یعقوبه، بنی اسرائیل که میگن اینا الان کسایی که تو اسرائیل هستن ادعاشون اینه که ما از فرزندان بنی اسرائیل و فرزندان اسرائیل فرزندان یعقوب هستیم، برای که اینطور نیست. و مخصوصا همه 80% از یهودی که الان تو دنیا هستن کسایی هستن که اشکنازی گفته میشن و این اشکنازی‌ها ساکنه یه دولتی قدیم بوده که اونجا شالا تقریبا هم بالکان میشه، طرفای اوکراین و اون طرفا، و اینا بعدا کم کم مهاجرت به مذهبشون برگشتن، مثلا مطلع شدن به یهودیت و بعد هجرت کردن به اوکراین و مثلا پخش شدن تو دنیا و تو روسیه و جای دیگه. و از مثالای اینا همون هنری کیسینجر هست که حالا خب وزیر خارجه آمریکا بود حدوداً 40 سال پیش و همه حالا پشت صحنه همه کاره سیاست آمریکاست، و همینطور پل نیومن که اون فیلم اکسودوس یا خروج یا اخراج از اسرائیل ساخته، یعنی به معنی که فیلم سینمایی ساخته که مثلا یهودی‌ها رو از اسرائیل بیرون کردن و اینجا سرزمین ما بوده، که اینا هیچ کدومشون اصلا اینجا هیچ وقتی قبلا تاریخی ساکن نبودن.
In fact, when somebody is accused of anti-Semitism, there's a very easy defense, that not many people realize, because they say, you are calling me an anti-Semite. It depends on whether it's another person, or it's an attorney, public attorney, or a judge. You say, first of all, Mr. Judge, he's a judge, you know what Semitism means. Do you know that? Because either you think that I am stupid, or you, the judge, are stupid. Because Semitism is people who come from Noah's children, Sem. And 97% of Semites are the Arabs. Jewish are only 2 or 3% of them. So ask me something more concrete, more specific, and don't believe I am silly. I mean, that's something somebody wants to make to corner you into a trap.
یکی از من دارم توضیح بدم، یکی از قانون‌های محکم خیلی سفت و سختی که تو اروپا و آمریکا هست، قانون مثلا به عنوان آنتی سمیتیسم یا ضد اسلامی بودنه، که هر کسی به این قانون متهم بشه با این قانون مثلا متهمش کنن که شما ضد اسلامی هستی، خب مجازات خیلی زیاد سنگین داره. و به این مبنا ترجمهشون که اسلامی یعنی هم کسایی که یهودی‌ها مثلا کسایی که نژاد یهودی‌ها که سامی برمیگرده به فرزندان سام پسر حضرت نوح و سامیایی که تو دنیا هستن 90%شون 98%شون عربن، 2%شون مثلا یهودی هستن. و اگه کسی مثلا ببرنش دادگاه و بتونه بلد باشه چی بگه، میگه یا قاضی احمق، یا خودت احمقی یا من احمق فرض می‌کنی، میگه ضد سامی هستن، سامی کجاست؟ مثلا سامی که گفته میشه.
So that basically, sorry, I lost my line. What was
Judge.
If still the person you are discussing with still insists because he wants to really put you into a trap, you can ask him without waiting, Do you want to say, or do you mean, do you want to accuse me of being anti-Judaic and anti-Jewish? So if you mean that, then we shall have to discuss religion, not politics, and not something that is subject to any criminal offense in a court. You know, we have to discuss only religion. That's all.
و حالا بحثی که من تو اروپا بیشتر هست، حالا خب دیگه همچین بحثی نداریم که میان حالا با یه جای کسی یه جای گیر کرد که خب بازم میگه که تو ضد اسلامی هستی، میگه شما منظورت اینه که من ضد یهودی هستم یا ضد چی؟ چون اگه در مورد یهودیت خب در مورد یهودیت صحبت کنیم، ولی اگه نژادیه ربطی به نژاد نداره. من حرفم مثلا کار به نژاد کسی نبوده مثلا.
But you say, if you want to ask me whether I am anti-Zionist or not, you might say there are several authors. One of them is Mr. Manuel Galeano from Spain, who has the books published there. You know, and yes, of course, I don't like Zionism as a mean of oppression and a mean of domination of the world. You know, so perhaps I am anti-Zionist.
میگه و همچین بحثی پیش بیاد. من ضد صهیونیست هستم ولی ضد اسلامی ربطی نداره، ضد اسلامی نداره.
Just a couple of things about the Jews, and for you to know, statistics show that 70 or 80% of those roughly 30 million Jews in this world are either agnostic or atheist.
و همطور که آمار نشون میده که 70-80% کسایی که الان 30 میلیون نفری که به عنوان یهود حساب شد دنیا 70-80%شون اصلا به خدا معتقد نیستن، اصلا ملحد هستن.
Of the other 20 or 30%, again another 70 or 80% will believe and follow the Talmud above the Torah.
و از اون 20% باقی مونده‌ای که حالا 20% باقی مونده‌ای که حالا اعتقاد مذهبی دارن، اونا دوباره 70-80%شون پیروان تلمود هستن یا تورات.
Because the Talmud is not a one book. They refer to the Talmud as a sacred book even more than the Torah. The Talmud is a total assembly of 72 books.
و تلمود یک کتاب نیست بلکه مجموعه از 72 کتاب.
And the maximum expert in English language of Talmud, Mr. Michael Hoffman, says and states, after having studied all his life, that the Talmud is a rabbinic literature of hatred towards Christ. That it is rabbinic literature of hatred against Christ. Rabbinic, the Jewish priests. Rabbi.
و این تلمود همونجور گفتم 72 کتابی که هست، یکی از کسایی که حالا خیلی متخصص زبان انگلیسی هست تو قضیه تلمود این چیزا، این کتاب خدا نیست، کتابی که نوشته دست اون ربایا یا روحانیان یهود هست که اینا کتاب نفرت و خیلی نفرت ضد بقیه مردم دنیاست.
Just to finalize, I'm going to skip Daesh, but in the questions, of course, you may ask things about Daesh if you want, so I will answer if I can. And just a couple of minutes about Catalonia. Most of you have been following the events in that part of Spain. Let me tell you one thing. Catalonia has never been a nation, has never been independent. That is well proven in Spanish history. What happens is that after General Franco's death in 1975, the Catalonians started rewriting their history the way they wanted, you know, and they have been independent in the past, but the rest of Spain had invaded them. A lot of, sorry for the word, a lot of bullshit. Incredible, but they have educated one or two generations already since 1975 in that false belief. In 1975, in that false belief from school, because they have been given autonomy to teach their children, for example, only the rivers in Catalonia and not the rivers in the rest of Spain, and things like that. And they explain Spain robs them, exploits them, you know, and that they don't belong to Spain. And the languages are not exactly the same, but Catalonian is like a dialect of Spanish.
حالا گفتن در مورد بخش داعش دیگه چون وقت نیست ازش میگذرن. حالا که کسی سوال داشت میتونن جواب بدن. و رفتم موضوع کاتالونیا هم در از یک دو دقیقه فقط توضیح بدن که کاتالونیا یکی از استان‌های خودمختار تقریبا تو اسپانیا، یعنی هیچ وقت تو تاریخ هیچ وقت نه یه ملت بوده نه اینکه مستقل بوده، هیچ وقت همچین چیزی نبوده. و اینا از سال 1975 که به عنوان یه استان اختیاراتی داشتن که تو مدرسه‌شون درس و مدارس خودشون کنترل داشته باشن، یه دو نسل تربیت کردن که ما یه ملت جدا هستیم و از مثلا جغرافی اگه درس میدن در مورد فقط جغرافی کاتالونیا درس میدن و اینا رو دو نسل بار آوردن که فکر کنن که واقعا یه ملتی بودن و همچین چیزی نبوده.
The people who were you saw in the street, the radicals, radicals are not more than 20, really, not more than 20% of the population, and we don't know at this point in time what is going to happen. These days, today, tomorrow, things are happening in Spain, because legally they can do nothing by the constitution. And there's only one thing that really upsets me and has me a bit mixed feelings, and it is one thing. If Catalonia would proclaim independence, there would be at least one state that would support them officially. The name of that state is Israel. Of all the states, why Israel?
در مورد زبانشون گفتن که زبان مثل بقیه اسپانیا کاملا صحبت نمی‌کنن، ولی زبان جدایی هم نیست، فقط مثل لهجه‌ای از زبان اسپانیایی است. و اینا اگر حالا به تقاضای مثلا اعلام استقلال هم بکنن، حتما قانونا همچین حقی ندارن طبق قانون که هست. تنها جایی که در ممکنه رو به رسمیت بشناسه فقط اسرائیل. هیچ کشوری دنیا دیگه اینا رو به رسمیت نمیشناسه مگر اینکه فقط اسرائیل رو به رسمیت بشناسه.
The relationship between Catalonia and Israel are excellent. Their local police is trained in Israel by the Mossad, the Israeli Mossad. And the oligarchies in Catalonia, the rich people, the politicians, and the big company owners, started many years ago sending their children in summertime to Israeli kibbutz, to spend their time.
علامه که میگن این که تو کاتالونیا خیلی از شرکت‌هایی که هستن پولدارها یا اولیگارشی‌ها اینا از سالهای پیش بچه‌هاشون رو تابستون می‌فرستن تو کیبوت‌های اسرائیل یا کیبوت‌ها مدت تعریف خودشه و همچنین اینکه اینا پلیسشون هم توسط موساد تربیت شده آموزش شده.
So that's we don't know what is going to be happening, but Mr. Claude Juncker said a few days ago, President of the European Community, that no, they were against, in Belgium they were against the independence of Catalonia, that they didn't want to have a European Union with 90 states, because they know it's not only Catalonia, there are 2 or 3 other examples in Spain, 2 or 3 other examples in France, and in many other, Scotland, in the United Kingdom, and many others that will follow. But Mr. Claude Juncker is somebody just put there by top Zionists and to do this and that, and if tomorrow Israel says, no, it's in my interest, that this starts happening in Europe so that Europe is blown up. Politicians will do whatever top Zionists will tell them. So that is why the situation is so uncertain in Catalonia, even if the central state has all the powers to stop that independence process.
و میگم فقط کاتالونیا نیست که تو قضیه جدایی پیش بخواد بره، خیلی چند تا دیگه تو خود اسپانیا هستن ممکنه میخواد فردا جدا باشن، تو فرانسه چند تا ایالت هستن استان هستن ممکنه جدا باشن، تو ایرلند هم اینطور. و با اینکه حالا اتحادیه اروپا گفته ما مخالفیم، ولی اگه فردا دستور از صهیونیست‌ها بیاد که این کارا پشتیبانی کنید میکنن، هر چی که اسرائیلشون بگه انجام میدن.
And on my side, I'm sorry I have been very extended about other subjects. We didn't cover Daesh, but in the question, I will also answer about Daesh. Thank you very much.
گفتم در مورد چون وقت نشد در مورد صحبت نکنم، ولی اگه سوال در مورد پیش اومد جواب میدم.